What programming language should I learn for game development? Hello, my name is Codemaster Jamal and I'm an indie game developer hailing from Homestead, Florida. This video is for anyone that wants to get into game development or for anyone that wants to get into programming in general. For a long time, my channel has become a home for people that are relatively new to game development and have a passion for coding and making video games. If this is your first time on my channel, please feel free to hit the like button for the YouTube algorithm and smash the subscribe button for more game development related content. Now, the reason why I'm making this video is because I get inboxed this question a lot in regards to how to get started making games. I'm also going to give my response to this question because usually if you ask this question, people tend to do one or two things. The first thing that people tend to do is troll you just because people ask this question a lot on forums and Facebook groups and Reddit, Twitch, you name it. And the unfortunate part about game development and the gaming industry is that not everyone is a very nice person. I remember when I was first getting into game development, I was asking people questions about how to build an MMORPG, like what were the secrets behind it, and most people just usually have some type of smart ass response. So that's the first thing that you have to look out for anyone that's new in game development. The second thing is that people may give you a very biased opinion on what programming language that you should be learning. This is usually because this is the language that they personally use the most and they're most familiar with. A lot of people have this idea that you have to stick to what you know, so they're going to tell you what they know and what they prefer to program with. And sometimes what other people may program with may not be best for you. So that's why today I'm going to give you guys a more unbiased opinion on what programming language you should use. I'm going to list the pros and cons of everything, and then more importantly, I'm going to help you guys get started in developing your own video games. What I'm going to do is I'm going to list 5 programming languages that are very popular and common amongst the game development community, and I'll allow you to make your own pick. I'll give you the pros and cons of each one, their functionalities, and I'm going to allow you guys to pick which language is best for you. I'll also cover game engines and obscure programming languages that aren't as common as others, as well as provide you with the truth about programming and game development in 2020. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so here's my recommendations on what programming languages you should learn. My recommendations go as follows: C++, Java, C#, Python, and if you want to get into web-based game development, I recommend learning JavaScript and PHP if you want to do more server-side things. These are the top 5 most common languages in the game development community. Most tutorials you find on YouTube use 1 out of 5 of these languages, and the reason why I'm actually giving you guys these recommendations is that for the most part they're very familiar with a lot of people and a little easier to learn in terms of picking up the lingo and stuff like that. It's easier to communicate with other people, and very commonly you can find a lot of documentation and a lot of support. If you want to learn how to create an array in a certain language, it's easy to go on Stack Overflow or look at the documentation because there's already a lot of documentation around for you to use. So its accessibility is a lot easier to find. It's easier to find someone who is, even if they're not well versed in one of these languages, they know it enough to help you out with something. And I'm going to go through each one of these languages and why you should actually try to learn each of them, give you their pros and cons. So the first one is C++. The syntax for it may be a little bit more complex and bizarre than the syntaxes for programming languages. For the most part, you can manipulate data on a bit level. For those of you that are new to programming, a bit is literally the smallest piece of data that can get within a computer. So you can manipulate things on a small, very, very microscopic level, on the smallest level there is possible, which basically the performance of your video games will be tremendously a lot better than others because of this. Now, you do have to work with pointers, which do get kind of confusing at times. A lot of people don't use pointers anymore, but if you want to program video games, I'm going to tell you that they're most likely necessary. I've seen enough C++ devlogs to see that a couple of people do use pointers, so it'll probably be good for you. And then in terms of game engines, there's actually a decent amount of game engines that use C++. One of the more popular game engines is the Unreal game engine, so if you want to get into game development, you can take a look into the Unreal engine and start learning how to program using the C++ language. The next one is Java. What I will say about Java is that it's a little slow in terms of runtime, but when it comes to graphics and those type of things, it's probably a lot better than most languages when it comes to rendering graphics. The thing about all these programming languages in general is that they also have a lot of tools within them, which includes like libraries and even external libraries that you can download that help you develop video games. That's also another reason why I say use one of these languages, is that they already have tools for building video games, and then they have additional libraries for video game development that you can use. So you can go with either or, and that's the whole point of using all these languages, is that, or any, just need to learn one, is that there's a lot of versatility. So keep that in mind. Now, the next one is the language that I use to develop my indie MMORPG Virtual Monsters, which is C#. What I will say about C# is that it's a lot easier to read than C++ and Java, and functionality-wise, it's very, very similar to C++ and Java. Compile time is very short compared to others. My only really big problem with it is that C# applications tend to drain the battery life of a lot of devices that they're on, so that's something that you have to look out for, and the rendering of graphics aren't the best. Yeah, so the big thing with C# is the Unity game engine, which a lot of people use. Unity is very, very popular. There's definitely a lot of haters. For the most part, it's still the most popular game engine in the world, and because it's the most popular game engine in the world, there's a lot of useful articles. The community of Unity game developers are very, very helping and inspiring on top of that. They're inspiring a completely new generation of game developers, which is awesome. So that's the most important thing about being a game developer. It's not just to create, but you also inspire people with the game section. So keep that in mind. The next one will be Python, and what I will say about Python is that it's definitely a lot easier to read, it's a lot easier to write. I personally don't have a lot of experience with Python, but I'm quite sure if I sat down for a day, I could learn it myself. I've seen enough Python scripts to know how it works actually with Python. All you have to do is download the latest version of Python, and basically you can just start writing scripts right away. They can use within a browser, or they can use computer as a program. In terms of game engines, I don't know too many Python game engines. I do know that there's Python game libraries. There's one in particular called Pygame. You can look out for that. A lot of new programmers tend to like Python a lot more because it's a lot easier to read. So that's the first thing to look out for. Now, the next language, which is meant for more web development, is JavaScript. I mentioned PHP as well, but we're going to focus more along the lines of JavaScript. You can use vanilla JavaScript to build games. What I will say about JavaScript is that if you want more in terms of functionality, there's a lot of libraries out there. You can download a lot of external sources to help improve your game. Like if you want to build like a browser MMO or whatever the project may be, there's pretty much a library for everything in JavaScript. JavaScript is one of the more popular languages right now because so much stuff to JavaScript that I can't list it all in one video. So those are my 5 recommendations. I advise you to go through the list and pick one of them just to begin. Now, what I'm going to move on to next is the more obscure languages and game engines. These are game engines that have their own programming language, which makes learning programming very, very tough and difficult if you don't know it already. Now, the reason why I mentioned those 5 programming languages, it's better to learn one of those languages and then go to one of these more obscure game engines or obscure languages, because at least at that point you have the basic understanding of programming versus diving right into a game engine like Godot or Beyond or RPG Maker or Adobe Flash. I believe they use something called ActionScript. If you've never dived into programming before, a lot of these things can be very, very confusing because a lot of those engines, they make it seem like it's very easy to develop a video game with their software, but then it's like there isn't a lot of support for them in terms of programming, and programming is a large part of their gaming. So that's the whole thing about obscure languages and game engines, is that the less popular ones, and I'm not trying to put them down at all, but the less popular ones tend to have a lot less information, and outside of this engine there isn't a lot of practical use for learning any of the tools found within that engine. Godot has GDScript, which is its own programming language for Godot, and Godot's a really, really great engine, don't get me wrong. That being said, outside of the Godot engine, you would probably only use GDScript when you're working with another person on a Godot engine based game. So like there isn't like a lot of functionality for it outside of that. Versus learning C++, Java, C#, Python, JavaScript. Outside of game development, there's still a lot of use for that in terms of developing AI, machine learning, web web development, you name it. There's a lot of purpose for it outside of game development. So that's the reason why I tell you to use one of those 5 recommendations, is that there's a lot of versatility with it. Though on the flip side, because there aren't a lot of people that are using those engines, that also gives you as a developer a lot of room to experiment with your games and come up with something new and interesting that no one's ever seen before because they never tried using this game engine. So there's also a lot of those type of things to look out for. Keep that in mind when you're selecting which game engine to download. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is the truth about game development and the truth about programming for video games. The truth about programming for video games is that you no longer need to know how to code in order to make video games. A lot of game engines, especially the Unreal Engine, support something known as visual scripting. So you no longer need to actually know how to program in order to make video games. There's a lot of components and those type of things to help you create your game. If you want to do something more, I guess, out there, you may need to learn programming, but it's not as necessary as it was probably 5 years ago or 10 years ago. You don't need to know how to program to make video games, and that's the truth about game development. There's a lot of game developers here on YouTube that are actually making games with visual scripting. One game would be Swords and Magic and Stuff by Kindred Games. I believe their whole team, I'm not sure if none of them, I'm quite sure there's somebody on the team that knows how to program, but for the most part, majority of their game is being put together using visual scripting found in the Unreal Engine. Essentially, the way how the industry has made it is that you can basically be a very, very great artist, not know how to program, and still make a great game, which is okay because a lot of people, in terms of game development, are more on the graphic arts side or more on the game design side of game development, and not as much the programming side. It's just how it is. That's just another prime example of how you can use visual scripting to make games. A lot of these people have a lot of people playing their games, and the best part about visual scripting is that you can have a concept for a game and easily put the game together and push it out to people for them to test. You can instantly have feedback for your game and feedback on how you should improve your game. So that's something you should look out for. Unity also has visual scripting, but once again, no beef between Unity, especially because they recently left a comment on my Twitter page. But, you know, they're a little late to the game when it came to visual scripting, but just another example that one of the world's most popular game engines even has visual scripting components. So you don't even need to know how to program to use Unity. You could use the visual scripting components, which a lot of people use. Now, a lot of people still program because they're more or less on the more programming side of game development. Me personally, I consider myself to be a jack of all trades. I have a decent amount of programming, graphic arts, music, and game design and level design. I'm intermediate at all of them, but not an expert in anything. And that's basically the truth about game development in 2020 and why you really don't need to know how to code in order to make good games. So that's something to look out for. Well, I think I've spent enough time already. This message of mine has definitely gone on a lot longer than what I expected. If you appreciate this video, feel free to leave a like for the YouTube algorithm and subscribe to the channel for more game development videos. It's been wonderful talking to you guys. I hope you guys have a great time on your game development journey, and best of luck. Keep making games. Until next time, this is Codemaster Jamal. I'm signing out.